Hi, and welcome to the Supporting Children with Anxiety webinar or workshop for parents and carers. This is delivered to you by mental health support teams in City and Hackney CAMS, and we will cover how to support primary aged children who are presenting with anxiety. So let me start by introducing myself. First of all, my name is Jansu Yilmaz, and I work for the mental health support team in City and Hackney CAMS. My team and I work across many primary schools and secondary schools across the borough, and we support young people and their families with mental health or emotional difficulties that they may be experiencing. And this is going to be a two-part video, so this is the first part, and welcome again. So we'll just go through the aims and objectives of this webinar to begin with. So the first two objectives will be covered in this section, and then the last two of the aims and objectives will be covered in part two. So as for this part, we will look at anxiety in children, exploring what it looks like and how it presents itself. And we will also explore the factors that lead to the development of anxiety in children and young people. And in the second part, we will try to understand the factors that lead to the maintenance of anxiety. So what's kind of keeping it going. And we will try and find practical ways and strategies on how to manage the anxiety your child is presenting with and how to help build confidence and self-regulation. Just a couple of reminders, as you will be using your electronic devices to watch this webinar. It is best to be mindful of any kind of drinks around your electronic device for safety reasons. It is best if you can listen to this in a quiet space and a time, uninterrupted, just so that you can kind of get the best out of it. And it is also recommended for all the adults with care and responsibilities to be able to watch and listen to this webinar for purposes of consistency. So these could be grandparents and any other people with some sort of care and responsibilities. I understand that some of this may be triggering, and if that's the case, please do take time out. Just pause for a second or for some time, and then it is okay to return to this when you feel ready to do so. And as I've said, it may be triggering or it may highlight some concerns for you. And again, it is okay to seek further support, and please do speak to your school's mental health lead or your GP if that's the case. So to begin with, what I would like you to do is to pause this video for about a minute and look at the following statements. I feel confident in my knowledge of anxiety. I know the factors that keep anxiety or worry, maybe in your child's case, going. I know some strategies to help my child's anxiety. As you can see on the screen, we've got a scale of 1 to 10. 1 means not confident at all. I don't know anything, and 10 means extremely confident, and I know everything that there is to know. So just pause it. Remember that there are no right or wrong answers. I just want you to check in with yourself to see where you are in terms of your confidence levels and rating yourself to see if this video is being helpful in any ways, as we will again revisit this and score ourselves again at the end of part two. So it's useful to make a note of these just so that you can compare them. So let's begin with what you think anxiety is. So thinking about it as a word cloud, I've got a couple of words on the screen already. So I want you to really think about the words that pop into your mind when you think about anxiety, or how does your child present that, you've noticed that they're excessively worrying or they're feeling anxious. So any kind of words that pop into your mind or any kind of phrases, please take 2 minutes And I am just going to play a timer just to kind of help aid that process of taking that reflective time out to really think about things and how it looks in your child as well. Welcome back, and I hope that that was helpful in thinking about what anxiety looks like in your child and what sort of knowledge you have to begin with before we get into a bit more detail. And if you find that actually the timer's not being helpful, it is okay to pause at the word cloud slide and think about what anxiety looks like, or what you know, and the words that pop into your mind. So let's explain what anxiety is now. So whether you're a parent or a child, we all experience anxiety, and I'm sure you have from your experience as well. So we know that anxiety is a normal reaction and can be useful at times. So if we think about crossing the road, for instance, before you cross the road, the anxiety or the fear of being hurt will stop you from jumping into the road without looking both ways. So anxiety in this situation will help keep you safe. Another example is a moderate level of anxiety before you run a marathon. So that will help pump adrenaline into your body and make you run faster, so the fast beating heart and all the associated symptoms and feelings that come with that. However, if anxiety is repetitive and excessive and it interferes with daily life and activities, that's when it tends to become a problem for children, young people, and as well as adults as well. So in response to these situations, to this anxiety-provoking situations, we can display either the fight, flight, or the freeze responses. So these are called the 3 responses. So if I had to give a brief example of this, it could be You're out, you've just gone out for a walk in, let's say, the forest, and we're just going to imagine that there is a grizzly bear that's just jumped into your path. So all of a sudden, you've got this grizzly bear in front of you. So you've got three options. You can either fight the bear, you can freeze in front of it where you don't know what to do, you can't think of what to do next, or you can run away from it. In other words, taking a flighting. And those are kind of linked with the three characteristics which I'm going to speak about now. So first of all, the first characteristic of anxiety is a physical sensation. So this is linked to, again, the release of adrenaline in the body and preparing the body for action, for that fight, flight, or freeze response. So some of the sensations could be sweating, a fast beating heart, trembling in some cases, butterflies in the stomach aches, or that sick feeling, or actually throwing up, headaches, or a very fast and an offbeat kind of breathing. The second characteristic of this is the anxious thinking. So this is when you become anxious and you typically expect something unpleasant to happen. So these are the thoughts. So the anxious thinking occurs when children overestimate the danger and underestimate their ability to cope. So we call this the anxiety equation. So where they think that the danger is much bigger than they're expecting it to be, and they think that they will not be able to cope within that situation. So some of these thoughts could be, what if I fail my exam despite having studied relentlessly, for instance? So these things can happen. You know, it could be someone who's academically very able, but then they have that thought of, what if I fail my exam? So these are anxious thought patterns. And the last characteristic is anxious behaviors. So the example of crossing the road and anxiety keeping us safe in that situation was actually a helpful behavior. But it can also be unhelpful in certain situations, such as instead of children having a go at things or just experimenting with situations, they come to you as the parents and caregivers and they're constantly seeking reassurances. Or it may be that they're avoiding particular situations and places. And we know from experience that, you know, one of these places could be school, for example, or a particular lesson, or being around a particular group of children, or even the playground itself. So these are unhelpful, anxious behaviors. And what tends to happen is, so these sort of work in a triangle where they keep one another going. So the physical sensations can trigger the thoughts can trigger the physical sensations, and then the behavior can trigger it. So it kind of works all the way around across that triangle where when one kicks off, it can trigger the other one. So the aim of the CBT work that we do within the MHSTs is to try and look at the behaviors and the thoughts and see if we can change these to a helpful cycle rather than an unhelpful, vicious cycle. So what I would like you to do now is, for the next 5 minutes, make a list of the worries and the thoughts your child has. How do these appear in your child's behavior? So is it crying? Is it avoiding certain places? And what do they do? So, and then lastly, I'd like you to think about which physical sensations do they experience. So is it the tense muscles? Is it difficulty with breathing? If you don't know the answers to some of these questions, it is okay. I would still like you to go ahead and try to complete it with the information that you have and that you think best represents your child. Maybe this could be a good food for thought, where next time you have the opportunity with your child, you might want to check in with your child and explore those physical sensations and those thoughts a bit more. and bringing their attention to those signs and symptoms as well as you noticing them as well. And it is okay to explore with our children. Again, what I'm going to do is share a 5-minute timer with you, but if you find that this is more helpful, having these questions as prompts on your screen, please do pause at this point and give yourself 5 minutes to go through this activity. Welcome back, and I hope that you found that time helpful to think about what anxiety looks like in your child. And if you don't have time to think about it, maybe you could have used the opportunity to think about what it looks like in the other children that you may be caring for, and that's okay. So if you would like to still pause this video and continue with it, please do so. So we've spoken about what anxiety looks like in children, what are the common signs and symptoms, and what it looks like in their bodies and their thoughts and their behaviors. I would just like to share this video of fight, flight, freeze response, which can be found on YouTube, if you like, under Anxiety Canada. So this is something we share in schools with our work with children and families. And I thought it might be helpful into how your child thinks about certain dangers when thinking about the overestimation of danger. So going to share that with you now.
You know that scared or nervous feeling you get when you have to do something you're not sure you can do? Or go somewhere you've never been before? That feeling is called anxiety. And it can feel a bit different for each person, but it usually doesn't feel very nice. Maybe your palms get sweaty, or your body tenses up, or maybe you get a tummy ache. Maybe you've heard of anxiety, or maybe you haven't, but you've definitely felt it before. Because everyone feels it sometimes. It's normal. You want to know something really weird about anxiety? It's actually trying to help you. It's true. All those uncomfortable feelings, those happen because your brain thinks you're in danger, and it wants to protect you. When our muscles tense up and we sweat, it gets us ready to do a lot of exercise, which is helpful if you need to jump out of the way of a runaway train or wrestle a wolverine. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When your brain does this, it's called fight, flight, or freeze. The problem is, sometimes your brain gets confused and it can't tell the difference between a charging moose and, say, going to a new school. Both things can be scary and cause anxiety. But there aren't any dangerous wild animals at a new school. Hopefully. Understanding where anxiety comes from is the first step in learning to deal with it. So the next time you're in one of those tough situations and you start to feel those feelings, like butterflies in your stomach or sweaty palms, or it gets hard to talk or move, remember, there's nothing wrong with your body. You're just having normal feelings of anxiety, and they're actually trying to help, even if they're not very good at it sometimes.
Welcome back again, and I hope that you found the video helpful in understanding how the overestimation of danger can happen with the underestimation of ability to cope. So in facing our fears and worries, we develop unhelpful ways of coping with anxiety, because let's face it, facing anxiety can be a real challenge. So this could be trying to escape or avoid certain situations altogether, which we spoke about earlier. Although these may appear to be helpful in the short term, they keep anxiety going in the long term. So a simple example of that could be someone who's anxious about traveling on the bus or in a car or public transport may avoid these altogether, and they find themselves walking to certain places all the time. In the short term, they may be convinced that they've found a way around the anxiety and around their fears. but they have simply learned to avoid and escape these feelings. So at some point, they will need to use these forms of transport, whether they're going to work or to a secondary school that may be further away from the house. And what they will notice is that the anxiety would have increased by this point. In psychology, we call these the safety behaviors, where they're helpful in the short term and not very helpful in the long term. So the habituation curve, as you can see on this screen, is, apologies for that. So as you can see on the left-hand side, that's the anxiety axis, and then the bottom is the time axis. So from the moment the anxiety starts peaking, what tends to happen is that we have this common misunderstanding that it's going to continue to increase and we will not be able to cope with it. So then at this point, we will sort of try and look for a way out, so that the urge to escape, where we're trying to flight from the situation or where we're trying to fight it. And what happens is, as you can see these curves, so the very first time when they face their fears and they have a go at facing these fears, they may see that it's taken a longer time to regulate and to calm down. And as they have repeated exposures to these, so the more they have a go at these, what they will see is that their anxiety levels drop much sooner than the previous time. So this is called repeated exposure, and it can be helpful in reducing the fears. So we spoke about someone who is anxious of getting on public transport. So the more they have a go at these fears, they will see that it's actually taken them longer, much shorter time to feel anxious, and then they're able to regulate themselves much sooner. So this is kind of helpful to think about how long it takes your child to have a go at these. And then once you start to implement the strategies, which we'll talk about in part 2, how is that impacting your child's anxiety, whether that's reducing it, so is it being helpful or is it not being helpful? So anxiety presents itself, or worrying behavior presents itself different in different age groups, as you can see on the screen. So take a moment to think back to what your child's fears and worries were, if they're around the age of, between 5 and 7, or 8 to 11. And it might be also helpful to think about your other children, as well as your child who's presenting with anxiety, to kind of see how they're comparing to one another. So from the ages of 0 to 6 months, the main fears and worries we see within that age group is sensory stimuli such as loud noises, loss of support. And between the months of 6 to 12, we see that they have fears of strangers, separation from caregivers. So you may find that they start to cry when they see an unfamiliar face, hence why that's one of their fears and worries. So between the ages of 2 to 4, this is when they start to fear creatures, the dark, burglars, people breaking into the house, the monsters under the bed, and so on. And between ages of 5 and 7, this is when we notice that they start to worry about natural disasters, injury, illness, death, animals, media-based fears. And we have definitely seen this with the pandemic, with COVID pandemic, where people have become worried about losing their loved ones, or they have lost their loved ones and they're worried about losing more. And they're really impacted by the news around the world. So yeah. And then between ages of 8 to 11, this is where they really start to worry about their academic and athletic performance. They may see a notice within their body, and you may start to notice puberty signs, and that's where the peer comparison kind of comes in, and they start to compare themselves to their peers or to social media influencers that they may be following if they've got access to social media at this point. And it is also important for children to have that sense of belonging and that sense of community. And this is when identity issues kind of tend to come into play. And between ages 12 to 18, fear of peer rejection and world issues tends to be a theme within that age group. So the current war in between Russia and Ukraine would also be one of those worries that they're currently experiencing, or the climate change and the fossil fuels and its effect on the climate change could be one of those as well. It's important to understand these different changes in fears and worries that they will experience, just to help kind of normalize that and I understand what kind of developmental stages that they are going through. So there are some factors which lead to the development of anxiety. So these factors can influence or contribute to this. Some of these are genes, life events, learning by example, as well as learning from others, and coping experiences. So let's firstly talk about genes. We know that where there is someone in the family with anxiety, children are more likely to have anxiety themselves, similar to other inherited personality characteristics. However, with anxiety, this only accounts for 1/3. So in other words, 1 part genes and 2 part experiences factor in the development of anxiety. So next is life events. These could be adverse life events and experiences such as parental separation, which we know to be risk factors, bullying, bereavement, COVID pandemic, which we spoke about. A stressful life event can have a much bigger impact on an anxious person than a less anxious person. Remember the previous slide of fears and worries in different age groups and how these even varied between siblings and peers. Despite these, for some children, stressful life events can help them build resilience. It can make some children more resilient, and it can impact some children's anxiety levels and increase those levels. We also learn from others. What we mean by that is children tend to rely heavily on information they get from those around them, especially those they are close to, and this is essential for keeping them safe and surviving in the world. This can have its advantages and disadvantages, as children can also learn unhelpful responses, and this is especially true for more anxious children. An example of this could be crossing the road when we see a big dog, for instance, and we tend to see that children sort of copy that behavior as well. And children are highly attuned to subtle signs, even if we attempt to disguise them. And we may think that we're actually in the next room and they can't hear us, they don't know, but they're highly attuned to these subtle changes. Learning from reactions is another factor. It's a natural response for a parent to show concern and to prevent their child from becoming distressed. However, in certain situations, we may often inadvertently respond in a way that increases the fear and the anxiety in that situation. Examples of these could be allowing them to stay home when they complain of a headache. So this is linking back to the safety behaviors. Sitting on the edge of your chair at your child's school assembly, as well as watching other people, what they do. And this leads to children also being on the lookout for how other people react to what they do. This sort of conveys the message that something bad might happen, or that we think that they can't cope, so we're ready to jump in, hence why we're sitting on the edge of our chair. So we can also unintentionally encourage to avoid these fears by stepping in and giving lots of reassurances as parents in the attempt of keeping them safe. So this is a natural response to distress, and it's a strong parental urge, avoiding or removing the child from these feared situations. However, it will take away from the opportunity of children having a go at these. Coping experiences are, so in order to overcome these fears, children and young people need to have opportunities to test out their fears and learn from challenges, as we spoke about with the previous one. So, for example, if a child doesn't like being in groups, a reaction to that may be avoiding putting them in situations that involve large groups, which in turn means that they don't get the opportunity to have a go at these and learn from these experiences, and then go back and try a different strategy and keep building on these. Although it can be helpful to know what's sort of leading to the development of anxiety, it is not always essential. What I mean by that is, in order to promote change and decrease the anxiety, knowing what's caused it might be helpful in avoiding another situation from recurring again. However, it is not always essential to look for ways in improving that situation. So if we think about, I really like this analogy of a car being stuck in the mud. Think about yourself driving a car, and then all of a sudden your wheels get stuck in the mud. So you come out of the car and you're analysing the situation. You've got two options. You can stand there and think to yourself, how on earth did I get here? What was it that I did? How did I get stuck in this mud? Or you can think about ways of coming out of that situation. So that's essentially what I'm trying to explain here. So we would like to focus on what can get us out in that situation. And once we're out, it might be helpful to think about what led to us getting in there in the first place. So this is the end of part 1, where we covered what anxiety looks like in primary age children and the factors that play a key role in the development of anxiety. In part 2, we will look at what is maintaining the anxiety and think about some strategies you can try to help your child decrease some of the symptoms of anxiety. And I'm hoping that you are finding this helpful. Please do leave comments on how you're finding this, and that's how we can improve any kind of future sessions and any future webinars as well. Thank you for watching and listening.